It felt like just another regular Sunday, or so I thought when I woke up that morning. Little did I know that by the end of the day, I'd have a story so strange. I still struggle to make sense of it as I write this. The day started off simply enough. My partner Sam, my close friend Jordan, and I were hanging out, bored out of our minds, scrolling through our phones without much interest. That's when Sam had an idea. "Hey, how about we go for a hike? It's been forever since we hit the old trail." The trail Sam was referring to wasn't just any path. It was a well-known hike that led to a large rock hanging over a cliff, offering a stunning view of the nearby town. It was breathtaking and, while a bit of a challenge, the route itself was straightforward. I'd walked it countless times, even after dark, following the local New Year's fireworks show. Jordan immediately perked up at the suggestion, her eyes bright with excitement. "That sounds awesome, let's go," she said, and just like that, we decided to go. We quickly gathered the essentials: water, flashlights, and some snacks before heading out. The trail wasn't far from where we were, so we walked to the start. The sun was already sinking in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees as we arrived at the trailhead. The light had that golden, beautiful quality to it, but was fading quickly, so we knew we didn't have much daylight left. Still, the path was familiar and we were confident in our memory of it. As we hiked, the beauty of the trail was just as I remembered. The trees created a lush canopy above us, with beams of sunlight filtering through, illuminating the forest floor. We were all in good spirits, chatting and laughing as we made our way along the well-worn route. But as we continued, the light started to disappear faster than expected. We soon reached a long, straight stretch of the trail, which seemed to go on forever. We were making good progress, but with darkness closing in, we all agreed it wasn't worth the risk of tackling the steep part in the dark. "Let's head back," Sam suggested, and Jordan and I readily agreed. We switched on our flashlights and started the trek back. At first, everything felt normal. The trail was just as I remembered it, which was a comforting thought as the forest grew darker. But then, as we approached a clearing where the trees opened up, revealing a view of the entire downtown area, something felt off. This spot had always been my favorite, looking down at the twinkling city lights as night fell. But tonight, the city below seemed wrong. "Does the city look strange to anyone else?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sam was the first to respond. "It feels like we're looking at it backwards," he said, confusion creeping into his voice. Jordan nodded, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced with unease. I thought it was just me. I didn't want to say anything. We lingered there for a moment, trying to shake the strange feeling that something was very wrong. But with night fully setting in and a long walk ahead, we reluctantly turned away from the unsettling view. As we walked deeper into the forest, everything around us began to feel different. The path, which I thought I knew so well, started to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. My heart began to race, a mix of fear and confusion clouding my mind. "We're just tired," Jordan tried to reassure us, though her voice was a little too high-pitched to be convincing. But this wasn't just exhaustion. The once familiar trail now felt like it was playing tricks on us, leading us in circles. Familiar markers were gone, replaced by an eerie sensation of being watched. Then, the trail itself changed beneath our feet. The ground felt rougher, wilder, as if no one had walked this way in years. "This isn't right," Sam muttered, stopping suddenly. "We should have hit the main road by now." Panic began to set in as we tried to retrace our steps, only to find that the path we had come from had somehow vanished. The trees loomed larger around us, their branches reaching out like claws, and the air seemed heavy with an unsettling presence. That's when we found the clearing. It wasn't the one with the city view, it was something completely different, something that felt out of place. In the middle of the woods, hidden away, was a door in the ground. It was old, rusted like the entrance to an abandoned mine or a bunker. Around the door were white chairs, arranged in a circle, each with a piece of white cloth draped over it. No signs of a campfire, no footprints, just the chairs silently sitting there. "What is this place?" Jordan whispered, her flashlight flickering over the strange scene. We didn't know it then, but we were about to make a choice that would haunt us. Our curiosity overpowered our fear, and we moved toward the door, drawn in by the mystery of it. It was a mistake. Each step felt heavier, as if the forest itself was watching us. The silence was suffocating, and we realized we had to leave. But no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't seem to escape. Every path we took led us back to that eerie clearing, to the door and the chairs. It was as if the woods were shifting around us, keeping us trapped. Our phones were useless, and our calls for help vanished into the night. Panic gripped us as the reality of our situation sank in. Were we stuck here, caught in an endless loop? And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it ended. The path cleared, and we stumbled back onto the familiar road. The cool night air had never felt so sweet, but the relief was short-lived. What had happened in those woods? Why had it happened to us? The experience left us shaken, with more questions than answers. Once home, Sam checked his phone to call our families and let them know we were safe. That's when we noticed something strange. His photo gallery had over 1,000 new pictures, all taken at the exact time we were lost, 10:32 p.m. But instead of actual images, the photos were just bursts of white. It didn't make sense. Sam had been using his phone as a flashlight the entire time, not the camera. The next day, we talked about going back to the woods to find that door, those chairs, anything to explain what had happened. But it took us a full year to gather the courage to return. When we finally did, the woods felt ordinary again. There was no sign of the door or the chairs. Instead, we found a rusted old meat grinder in a clearing, another strange relic that didn't belong. I've spent countless hours trying to rationalize what happened that night. Was it a shared hallucination? Could there have been something in the air? But nothing makes sense, especially not the photos on Sam's phone. The experience has left me with a lingering fear of the woods. What was once a place of peace and adventure now fills me with dread. I've shared our story online, hoping to find others who have experienced something similar. Yet, no matter how much we talk about it, we never find any answers. That night changed something in us. We made it out of the woods, but a part of us is still trapped there, lost in that strange and twisted place. The woods are no longer just trees and trails to me. They're a mystery, one I'm not sure I ever want to solve. My friends and I had been living in the lively center of Los Angeles, a city full of energy, but we were longing for an adventure away from the urban sprawl. We decided to go on a road trip that would take us into the wild landscapes of Canada, circling around Lake Erie and then heading back home through the picturesque routes of northern Pennsylvania. I guess we were searching for some literal fresh air. You see, I'm from Argentina, a country rich in culture, history, and beautiful scenery. But since I moved to the US for business school with my friends Megan, Sarah, and Chloe, I had been eager to explore more of this continent's natural beauty. Though I always had a spirit for adventure thanks to my days in a hiking club back home, my friends were more used to city life. Yet their excitement for this trip was contagious, and we were all buzzing with energy. The plan was straightforward, or so we thought. Rent a car, pack the essentials, and hit the open road, enjoying the kind of freedom you usually only read about in books. The excitement was real as we planned our route, talked about the places we'd visit, and imagined the memories we'd create. Little did we know, our adventure was about to take an unexpected turn, giving us a story we'd never forget. The drive was long but beautiful, filled with laughter, sing-alongs, and endless conversations about everything and nothing. As the city skyline disappeared in the rearview mirror, we were welcomed by the wide, green landscapes of the countryside. In those moments, with the wind blowing through the open windows and the world ahead of us, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in a long time. However, as the sun began to set and we neared our stop for the night, a secluded cabin deep in the forests of northern Pennsylvania, a sense of unease began to set in. The cabin, which had been described as a charming nature retreat, was about 30 minutes outside of Scranton, or so we thought. Our excitement started to dim as nightfall arrived, and the reality of our isolated spot in the woods became clear. Navigating the muddy forest roads without cell service became difficult, and we had to rely on an old map we found in the car. I could sense the tension among us rising, especially when we came across a perfectly set-up campfire in the middle of the woods with no one around. It was eerie, to say the least, and a stark reminder of how far we were from the busy streets of Los Angeles. After some wrong turns and growing nervousness, we finally arrived at the cabin. It was just as described, old, made of rough logs, and completely without modern comforts like electricity or running water. The idea of spending the night in such a remote place began to sink in, but we tried to make the best of it. With my limited wilderness experience, I teamed up with Megan to take charge. We used our phone flashlights to explore the cabin, hoping to find some lanterns or firewood. Unfortunately, the rain had soaked most of the wood, and starting a fire seemed nearly impossible. The cabin had its own charm, though, and as we gathered around to cook some pasta, we embraced the rustic experience. As the evening wore on, our spirits lifted a bit. Sarah and Chloe worked on getting the beds ready and making sure the windows were tightly shut to keep out the cold. It almost felt cozy in a strange, adventurous way. But as night closed in, so did a sense of unease I couldn't shake. That's when Sarah, one of the city girls, came over to me with a serious look. She quietly mentioned that she'd seen an old cemetery while we were driving and, even more unsettling, had spotted someone or something moving near it. At first, I wanted to laugh it off. We were here to get away from the stress of school, not scare ourselves with ghost stories. But the look in her eyes told me she wasn't joking. I assured her I would lock all the doors before we went to bed, but deep down, I felt a growing sense of anxiety. After a simple meal and some failed attempts at making s'mores on the stovetop, the others headed to the loft for bed. Meanwhile, I found myself drawn outside, feeling the need to be alone with nature for a while. Sitting on the porch with my last beer in hand, I let the quiet settle in. The only sounds were the soft patter of rain and the distant babble of a nearby stream. It was peaceful, a world away from the hustle of LA. But then, as I scanned the dark forest with my flashlight, an unsettling feeling crept over me. Suddenly, a loud roar pierced the night, unlike anything I had ever heard before. My mind scrambled to figure out what it was, but nothing came close. Not from my experiences in Argentina nor anything I had heard about American wildlife. It wasn't a bear, that much I knew. Then I saw it, a figure tall and dark, standing at the edge of the trees. Its eyes reflected the light from my flashlight, glowing eerily in the darkness. The figure was massive, far taller than me at 6 feet 2 inches. For a moment, time seemed to freeze as we locked eyes, and then it disappeared into the woods with another roar. Fear shot through me, and I raced back into the cabin, locking the doors and pulling every curtain closed. My heart was pounding, and my mind raced with thoughts of what I had just seen. Was it a trick of the light? Some kind of wild animal? Or something else entirely? The stories of strange creatures in the woods, stories I had always dismissed, suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted into a restless sleep. But even as I lay there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching. The first light of morning brought a sense of relief, though the memory of the night's events lingered. I decided not to tell the others about the figure I'd seen. It seemed unnecessary to scare them when they were already so excited about the day ahead. We had breakfast together, the mood light and happy, as though the previous night's fears had disappeared with the darkness. As we packed up and drove back towards the city, we reflected on the beauty of Canada, the fun we'd had circling Lake Erie, and the unique experience of staying in that old cabin. But my thoughts were elsewhere, still fixated on the strange figure I had seen in the woods. Back in the comfort of the city, the memory of that night began to fade, but it never completely left me. I couldn't help but search the internet for answers, scrolling through forums and articles about strange sightings in the forests of Pennsylvania. Could it have been a bear or something else entirely? I found no clear answers, only more questions. In the end, I decided to share my story here, hoping that someone out there might have experienced something similar. Perhaps they could help me understand what I saw, or at least reassure me that I wasn't alone in my experience. One thing is certain, that night changed me. It reminded me that the world is full of mysteries, both beautiful and terrifying, and it left me with a story I'll never forget. The news hit me like a runaway train. Last spring, while I was on the other side of the globe, my brother Luke vanished without a trace during a backpacking trip with his friends. Luke had just turned 19, and I, already entrenched in adulthood, had let life and its countless distractions pull us apart. I was busy making my own way in the world while he was off, doing who knows what. It wasn't supposed to turn out this way. We had sworn to stay close after our mom passed away, but that promise, like the silence between us, grew heavier as the years went by. I was in Asia when it happened, completely wrapped up in my new job and oblivious to what was happening back home. Easter was supposed to be our reunion, a chance to patch up our strained relationship. Instead, I returned to find an empty spot at the table and a silence that screamed his absence. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked, the words echoing in the cold, familiar air of our childhood house. "The police didn't have your current number?" my aunt mumbled, avoiding my eyes. "And his friends, they thought he was with you." A pit of guilt formed in my stomach, gnawing away at me. I had been so consumed with my own life, I didn't notice when Luke's texts and calls became less frequent. I assumed he was just busy, like I was. It never occurred to me that his silence was unintentional. Determined to find out what had happened, I asked around. His friends' stories didn't add up. They said he left the campsite in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and never returned. Each of them described a different spot for the campsite, and their vague recollections made it obvious they were hiding something. I was frustrated, but it only made me more determined to uncover the truth. I went to the police for help but was met with indifference. "We'll investigate when the weather clears," they said, as if it wasn't urgent. Felt like I was on my own, fighting a growing fear. Winter dragged on, and with it, my anxiety intensified. The snow made search efforts impossible, and Luke's friends, now avoiding me altogether, threatened legal action if I pressed further. When spring finally arrived, I got the call I had been dreading. A man searching for gold along the river had found something far worse: small, unmistakable human bones. The weeks that followed brought more grim discoveries: part of a skull, ribs, and a haunting silence from the authorities. They ruled it a tragic accident, but the bones told a different story. They showed signs of violence, something far more sinister than nature could explain. I should have been there for him. After our mom died, I promised to look out for Luke, to be the one person he could rely on. Instead, I was half a world away when he needed me the most. That guilt stayed with me, a shadow I couldn't escape. I quit my job, left everything behind, and returned home, determined to find out what really happened to my brother. The truth had been buried under layers of lies, and I was prepared to dig it up, no matter the cost. The day I decided to confront his friends was bitterly clear, the sky too bright, mocking my grief. I tracked down one of them, Ryan, at a local cafe. He saw me coming, his eyes darting nervously. "Tell me what really happened that night," I demanded, sitting across from him. His hands shook as he held his coffee. "It's like we told the cops," he stammered. "He went to the bathroom and never came back." But I knew their stories didn't match up. Each one had described the campsite differently, and none of the spots they mentioned had been searched. When I pressed him, Ryan's facade broke. "We didn't notice he was gone until morning," he admitted. "We were scared, okay?" Their fear had twisted the truth, turning them into enemies instead of allies in the search for Luke. As the snow thawed and spring brought warmer days, more of his remains were uncovered. Bones that painted a picture of something far worse than an accidental death. The police wanted to close the case, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. The scratches on the bones, the way they were scattered, it wasn't the work of animals. There was something deliberate about it. I had failed Luke, and now I was determined not to fail him again. I had to find the answers that everyone else seemed willing to ignore. The small town near the forest where Luke had disappeared was cloaked in silence, the kind that suggested everyone knew more than they let on. I started asking questions, beginning with the local diner. The waitress, a kind woman in her 50s, leaned in as she served me pie. "People around here don't go into those woods," she whispered. "Bad things happen." Determined to learn more, I went to the ranger station. The ranger, a gruff older man named Jack, looked at me with a mix of pity and frustration. "Some things are better left alone," he said. When I insisted, he reluctantly handed me a map, pointing out the last known location of Luke's campsite. "Be careful," he warned. "The forest doesn't always give back what it takes." Rumors led me to an old cabin deep in the woods, a place the locals called Thornridge Cabin. The legend said a tragedy had happened there years ago, and the place had been cursed ever since. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and my growing fear, I made my way there. The cabin was as eerie as the stories suggested, abandoned and decaying, like it had been forgotten by time. Inside, I found something that sent a chill down my spine. A silver bracelet, one that I had given to Luke for his birthday. He had been here. Night fell quickly, and with it came the sounds of the forest. Rustling leaves, cracking branches, and something else, something unnatural. A low growl filled the air, and before I knew it, I was face to face with a creature that defied explanation. A twisted fusion of man and beast. I fought for my life, barely managing to survive. The next day, I left the woods, but I knew this wasn't over. I had seen too much, and the questions that haunted me, about Luke, about the creature, were just beginning.